Brazil brought to a standstill by a general strike sparked by President Bolsonaro's reforms to a bloated pension system. One of the country's main trade unions estimates 45 million workers have taken part. President Trump blames Tehran for attacks on 2 oil tankers near the strategic Strait of Hormuz. As the US military releases video it says shows Iranian forces removing an unexploded mine from one of the ships. And the World Health Organization rules no international emergency in the Democratic Republic of Congo, even as the second worst Ebola outbreak ever spreads to Uganda. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. Now, large parts of Brazil have been brought to a standstill this Friday by a nationwide strike and mass demonstrations. They were triggered by the proposed pension reforms of President Jair Bolsonaro, who came to power 6 months ago, pledging to trim the fat after years of left-wing governments. The changes have faced strong resistance from trade unions and the lower house of Congress, where Bolsonaro's ultra-conservative Social Liberal Party has only around 10% of the seats. But the government argues that savings are vital to prevent Latin America's wealthiest nation going bankrupt. Luke Schrago tells us more.
Unrest in Rio de Janeiro as a 24-hour strike kicked off across Brazil. Workers want a halt to unpopular reforms.
We're calling for a national strike against the pension reform and Bolsonaro's government and the agreement Bolsonaro has with the lower house, with the centrist parties and the Supreme Court. The pension reform will make pensions disappear and will make the workers work until they die. We strike to defend education and against the cuts the government announced against it.
Even before his January inauguration, President Jair Bolsonaro has more than ruffled feathers. The far-right leader sparked demonstrations over his misogynistic comments and conservative social agenda, along with protests over what many see as his erosion of protections for indigenous ethnicities and their land in favor of big agriculture. Bolsonaro's pension reform, though, along with major potential cuts to the education budget, has sparked a wave of anger and a rare general strike against a backdrop of a sluggish economy, rising inflation and persistently high unemployment, particularly with the young. Bolsonaro's plan would see the retirement age raised to 65 for men and 62 for women and increase social security contributions for savings of what his government says would be 1 trillion reais, $260 billion US. Economy Minister Paulo Guedes recently threatened to quit his job if the reform was watered down. He says that without it, the country could go broke by next year.
Well, demonstrators have been blocking roads and other transport links in several cities, including Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, where police used tear gas to clear the streets. This making travel difficult for football fans hoping to attend the opening match of the Copa America between Brazil and Bolivia that's set to kick off within hours. Earlier this evening, France 24's correspondent in Rio de Janeiro, Catherine Osborne, told us more about the background to the strike action.
For months now, lawmakers have been negotiating over how to save money cutting Brazil's pension system. And Bolsonaro presented this as one of the big things he was going to do in office. It was part of his right-wing economic profile during the elections. He said he will cut Brazil's pension system, and his economic chief has been very vocal about the need to do that. He presented a plan that was indeed aggressive. Since then, in part because of street protests and just general dissatisfaction with his administration, lawmakers have whittled away some of those cuts. So his original plan was going to cut over 270 billion euros in about 10 years. And the new version of it that was presented on Thursday cuts those reductions down to around 200 billion euros in 10 years. So the elderly and disabled people aren't going to see their pensions slashed as much as they were before. This shows that Bolsonaro and the lawmakers in Congress are aware of the dissatisfaction on the streets about this. Today is the third day of a big protest in the past month alone against this administration, and so lawmakers are responding.
We move on now, and the US military has released a video it says shows Iranian forces removing an unexploded mine from one of the 2 ships that were attacked near the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has denied involvement in Thursday's suspected attacks that rattled global oil markets. Alison Sargent and Nick Rushworth have the details.
Using this video as evidence, U.S. President Donald Trump directly blamed Iran for Thursday's attack on 2 oil tankers. The footage released by the U.S. military claims to show Iran's Revolutionary Guard removing an unexploded mine from the side of one of the 2 vessels. Speaking to Fox News, the U.S. president said it exposed Iran as guilty and a nation of terror. Iran has firmly denied the allegations. For the president, Hassan Rouhani, the U.S. is the one sowing terror in the region.
The U.S. government has acted against all international laws and structures in the last 2 years, and it has posed a serious threat to regional and international stability.
Russian president and Iranian ally Vladimir Putin also accused the U.S. of creating instability with its decision to abandon the Iran nuclear deal. Meanwhile, the UK says they have no reason not to believe their U.S. allies, but want to make an independent assessment. In Thursday's incident, explosions on the Norwegian-owned Front Altair and Japanese-owned Kokuka Courageous forced crews to abandon ship and leave the vessels adrift in waters between Gulf Arab states and Iran. The operator of the Kokuka Courageous contradicted the U.S. in his account of events.
The crew is saying that it was hit by a flying object. Putting a bomb on the side of the boat is not something we're thinking.
Thursday's incident comes after the U.S. accused Iran of sabotaging 4 oil tankers in the Persian Gulf last month. These latest suspected attacks caused a spike in oil prices as tension in the region escalates.
Now, the World Health Organization has decided not to declare an international emergency over the Democratic Republic of Congo's Ebola outbreak, despite the spread of the deadly virus to Uganda this week. The panel concluded that such a declaration would not help the situation and would risk creating restrictions to travel and trade that could severely harm the West African nation's economy. The epidemic is the second worst ever, with over 2,100 cases and more than 1,400 deaths since last August. Kerry's Garland has more.
More funding is desperately needed in fighting Ebola. The message to come from the World Health Organization's Emergency Committee as it met for the 3rd time on the current Ebola outbreak. But despite more than 2,000 confirmed cases and a recent spread to neighbouring Uganda, the disease has not been deemed an international emergency.
It was the view of the committee that the outbreak is a health emergency in the Democratic Republic of Congo and the region. But it does not meet all the 3 criteria for a public health emergency of international concern.
More than 1,400 people have died since the outbreak was declared in August, and until this week the virus hadn't spread outside the Democratic Republic of Congo. 2 people have died in Uganda after becoming infected with Ebola, while there is 1 other confirmed case. The Emergency Committee advised neighbouring countries to improve their preparedness, as it says Uganda has done this week. And the panel's main message was clear: a boost in funds is crucial.
The committee is deeply disappointed that WHO and the affected countries have not received the funding and resources needed for this outbreak.
The Ugandan Red Cross has increased the number of its personnel monitoring border points, as well as trying to raise awareness of ways to prevent the spread of Ebola. Rwanda's government says it's tightening border surveillance as it borders both Uganda and the DRC.
And France 24's correspondent Gronia Harrington is in Uganda, where 3 cases of Ebola have been confirmed this week, 2 of them fatal. She earlier gave us more details on the factors that led to the WHO's panel's decision.
Well, there are many factors that have played into this, and one of them is that at the heart of this crisis is that violence right at the epicenter of the outbreak in eastern DRC, which has contributed enormously to the spread of the disease. And what they are saying is that extra sanitary measures will not get to the heart of that particular problem, which has been a massive contributor to the spread of the disease. The other big issue that they took into the account was this very long and porous border between Uganda and DRC is essential for trade between the two countries, and declaring an international public health emergency would have shut down that border. And so they were taking into account, they said, the potential effects on the economy in eastern DRC, which could have been very, very serious. Now, while there's been no official reaction here, there's been a mixed reaction from health professionals who are also saying that this crisis hasn't really gotten the international attention that it deserves, and that the extra funding that would have been opened up by declaring an international public health emergency would have been crucial to solving that problem in eastern DRC. So there are really very mixed reactions to that decision, but it's clear that the WHO considers that it is restricted to the DRC, that it's an emergency there, that it has potential to become a problem in the region, but that it's not yet ready to spread internationally.
A 17th straight Friday of protests has rocked the Algerian capital Algiers, with tens of thousands of people renewing calls for the ruling elite to step down. The unrelenting demos appear to have some effect this week, with several former officials linked to the former president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika, being detained in the past few days, although this has done little to appease the demonstrators. Claire Rush has the details.
The 17th consecutive Friday protest in the Algerian capital Algiers was a mix of celebration and defiance. Thousands hailed the recent wave of high-profile arrests pushed by General Gaïd Salah, but others say it's not enough.
They build jails for us, but they will enter them, judge them all, and take them to jail.
We demand everyone step down, including Gaïd Salah and his gang, and all those who ruined the country.
This week, 2 former prime ministers were detained in just 2 days as part of a sweeping corruption probe. Abdelmalek Sellal was arrested on Thursday, just 1 day after Ahmed Ouyaya was taken into custody. But protesters are calling for the departure of all senior politicians with ties to ex-president Abdelaziz Bouteflika, including General Gaïd Salah, who has overseen the country's transition since Bouteflika stepped down in April. Many demonstrators are unwilling to budge from their demands. They've refused to meet with interim president Abdelkader Ben Salah ever since authorities postponed a presidential election previously planned for July 4th. No new date has been set for the vote.
And finally, like every year, thousands of people are preparing to flock to southern France for their summer holidays this summer. But a family of tourists already there is making headlines here. Well, that's because their last name is Obama. The former president and first lady, their children, and a large security detail are taking a break at an exclusive holiday home in Avignon. Claire Muffson tells us more.
Full of medieval charm, with a view of the Papal Palace in Avignon. This town of Villeneuve-les-Avignon awaits the arrival of the Obama family for a discreet one-week vacation. It's the hot topic in the commune of 12,000 people.
It would be nice to run into them. We would like that.
What will you say if you see them?
Yes, I can.
This is our regular spot, so if he wants to come drink a coffee here, he's welcome.
There's the monastery, the Saint-André Fort, the Philippe le Bel Tower, the Tower Gardens. There's a lot to see.
It's the family's first visit to the Gare region, and this restaurant owner knows just what to recommend.
I'd suggest the aioli. We're in Provence, it's a must.
And finally, the big question on everyone's minds. Which house will serve as the former president's hideaway? This real estate agent has some idea of the kind of villa he'd have chosen.
He could rent a house on the heights of Villeneuve, maybe with a helicopter pad and an infinity pool. There could be a big bay window or veranda with a view of the whole region.
The estimated cost, €3,000 a week. The U.S. Secret Service is taking charge of the security for the private vacation. The family and staff of 14 is expected to land in Avignon tonight.
That's all the time we have on this edition. Stay tuned to France 24.
Japan's southern cluster of islands was the theatre of some of World War II's bloodiest fighting. The Battle of Okinawa alone lasted 82 days and left over 200,000 casualties. Today, continued US military presence on the island is a constant reminder of the past. Many Okinawans want American troops to leave, but the Japanese government wants to consolidate them on a single giant base. Critics say this will strengthen US presence and pose a major threat to the carefully preserved environment.
The relocation of the US military on Okinawa. All this week on France 24.